Hello and welcome to our discussion today. We want to quickly take a look at ethical issues in the workplace. And by the end of this session, you should be able to describe employee and employer rights and responsibilities. You should be able to examine workplace discrimination and diversity. You should also be able to describe the concept of whistleblowing and corporate whistleblowers. And then we should also be able to explain fair compensation and then some labor practices. Okay, so these are what we'll be doing in today's um, discussion. So to start off, we realize that every employee in an organization has some rights that have to be protected. And so, in order to have the organization working ethically, there's the need to protect these rights of employees. The first one is the right to a safe workplace. Every employee has the right to a safe workplace. What this means is that the area where the employee has to work is such that the place has to be kept safe. The place has to be such that that employee will not come to work and go back home maybe without a finger or without a part of their bodies or go home hurt. So the employer has to ensure that the employee has a safe working area. Then there's also the right to equal treatment and non-discrimination. Every employee has to be treated the same way, all right, in a way that is not looking like you are favoring one employee over the other. So there's the right to equal treatment and non-discrimination. There's also the right to freedom of speech. Every employee has an opportunity to express how they feel and what they think. It is not right that as an employer, you prevent your employees from expressing themselves freely. The fourth one is the right to privacy. Okay, every employee has the right to privacy so that if some information has been made available to the organization, you don't expect, or it's not right that the employer makes the employees' information available to people without informing that employee. It's important that you reserve that privacy for the employee and all personal information kept confidential. And then there's also the right to whistleblower protection. If for some reason an employee gets to tell you or disclose some wrongdoing in the organization, it is important that these employees be protected from harm. Because sometimes after blowing the whistle, you realize that people come for the employees who blew the whistle. So it's important that these employees who blow the whistle are protected. Then you look at the responsibilities of employees. You don't just say that employees have rights and that's it. So employees also have responsibilities. In addition to the rights that they have, they are also expected to do something. And it is expected of every employee to conduct him or herself in an ethical manner. Okay, they should conduct themselves ethically. Then employees should also comply with rules and regulations, both internal rules and regulations, as well as external rules and regulations. Because if the employee does not comply with laws and with regulations, what will happen is they are likely to get themselves into trouble as well as drag the organization into trouble. So it's important that employees comply with the regulations of their organization. The third one is to ensure that they are able to manage conflict of interest well. So employees are to ensure that when they get into situations where there are conflicts of interest, they are able to manage these well. Okay, so that the employee gets to know at what point his personal interests is getting in the way of the organization's interest. Okay, so they should be able to manage the conflicts of interest well. They should also be able to report ethical concerns when they arise in the organization. So they have to be able to report things that are not going on well in the organization. Another word for this is whistleblowing. So they have to say, you don't just see wrongdoing and close your eye to it. It's the responsibility of employees to say when things are going wrong in the organization, issues related to ethics. And then the fifth one is to ensure that at the workplace, that employee or at the workplace, employees are conducting themselves in a respectful manner, okay, where they are not infringing on the rights of other employees and they are not misbehaving and conducting themselves in a way that is disrespectful. So they are to ensure that they are conducting themselves in a respectful manner at the workplace. And then the sixth responsibility of employees is to ensure that on a continuous basis, they are getting themselves educated on issues related to ethics. Okay, so it's very important that from time to time, employees are trained on issues related to ethics. That takes us to the concept of honesty and fairness at the workplace. So at the workplace, it's expected that employees remain honest. All right. Honesty is the bedrock of trust and trustworthiness. So if an employee is in the workplace and this employee is honest, what it means is that the person tells the truth, the person is sincere, the person is not deceiving or misleading people, or is not involved in any tricky or devious acts. Okay, it's not betraying the trust of other people, it's not withholding information from others. All right. And it's this is expected in the organization. You don't expect dishonest people in the organization. You want people to work in an honest manner at the workplace. And there are two dimensions of honesty. You have honesty in communications, and then you have honesty in conduct. You have honesty with what is said or what you say, and honesty in what you do. All right. So if an employee is honest, you get to see their honesty in how they communicate with others as well as how they conduct themselves. All right. So yeah. So honesty is manifested in any of these forms, either in what the person says and what we hear from the person, as well as how the individual or how the employee conducts him or herself. Okay. So we look at the concept of cheating. If someone is not honest, then they are dishonest. And another form of dishonesty is cheating, right? So cheating is a despicable form of dishonesty. And cheating is a way of gaining an advantage over those who do not cheat. So, for example, if you sit in an exam and two students, one decides that he's going to cheat, what it means is that he's trying to gain an advantage, all right? Or at the end of the exam, is if he's not caught, it will be as though that student did better than everybody else. But if you investigate further, you will realize that that person cheated. Okay, so cheating is a way of gaining an advantage over those who don't cheat, right? And it occurs everywhere. So for employees, it can occur on their CVs, on their timesheets. So sometimes people get to work and they don't get to record the actual time that they got to work. Some people report uh, time that is way earlier than the time that they are reporting to work. All right. There are times that people make requests for claims, and you'll notice that the amount quoted on the claim is way higher than what they actually spent. So cheating occurs in the workplace on the resumes that are submitted, or on the curriculum vitae that are submitted, on the timesheets of um, employees, right? On their expense claim forms, on safety reports and other um, measurement documents in the organization, reports, um, a lot of things, okay, on letters, on meetings, correspondences. So you realize that if an employee is not careful, it is so easy to find him or herself cheating. And there are two types of cheating we see here. There's the first one, which is called hooking the books. And then we have beating the system. Cooking the books is most of the times done on a large scale, on very important documents. And most of the times, cooking the books constitutes criminal fraud. And it's done daily on internal reports. So you realize that um it's not so far, right? Employees get to sometimes be supervised by people who expect so much from them. And in order for such employees to keep a clean sheet in front of these employees, they they end up telling the boss what the boss wants to hear and not what is actually being done. Okay, so they get to report what is not actually the case. So if it is the recording of maybe sales that have been made, you realize that such employees will bloat figures or try to make it look like they are performing so well, when in actual case they are not performing as well as it looks like. Okay, so that is cooking the books. Then you have beating the system, where people actually manipulate what is counted in a way that produces an illusion of success, but actually masks more relevant measures of performance. Okay, so people find ways of having their way when it gets to issues related to the workplace, right? So, for example, if an activity has to be done, there's some measure of excellence that is required. You are likely to find employees who will not put in the work that is required, but they would make it look like they did the work as if it was required. So you have cooking the books, which most of the time manifests itself. It manifests itself, sorry, in most of the times the reports, your annual reports, the financial reports, and all of those. Then you have beating the system, which manipulates um the system in a way that produces results as though the employee is doing very well. Meanwhile, that is not actually the case. All right. Then, when you come to management or the organization as a whole, it is expected that the organization manages employees, or ensures that the organization is run in an honest and a fair manner. Okay, because most of the times employees are motivated when they feel that the organizational resources are fairly allocated, or everyone within the organization who is working like they should is having a fair share of the organization's resources. And that if decisions are made, the decisions are made in a fair way, and that the organization is also treating them fairly, right? So if this is not done, or if the organization is conducting itself in a way that employees are not feeling that they are fairly treated, then it demotivates them or it demoralizes them. Okay, so once that happens, then the motivation to continue working or the motivation to continue producing the necessary results are no more there. Okay, so it is important that employees feel that they are fairly treated in the organization. So employees who experience fairness at work are more likely to internalize the organization's goals and values. Okay, they are able to own decisions that the organization makes, and it helps to develop a close bond with other organizational members. So you can see an employee who is motivated, right? Because he knows that he's fairly treated at the workplace. You realize that they are very productive, they work well, and they tend to internalize the organization's goals and values. They produce results that are required by the organization. They also are able to develop close bonds with other organizational members. All right. So when this happens, then they get to work together collaboratively in a team to produce the necessary results that the organization requires. And this is what you call the management by fairness approach. So this motivates employees to work collaboratively for the long-term good of the organization and its members. Okay. And when they work together in that collaborative mode for the long term, you realize that they 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 tend to incline towards behaving in more ethical behaviors than if they felt they were not being treated well. So, for example, an employee who feels that he is not being compensated well for the work that he's putting in the organization may find himself involved in some fraudulent activities. Okay, unlike if he felt that he was being treated well. Okay, so the long-term collaborative focus tends to produce ethical behavior in the employees. So it is important that management provides an honest and fair environment where employees tend to work in. So there are ways that organizations can ensure honesty and fairness at the workplace. All right. It's important that there's a focus on fairness. So um, for the employees and the employers, everyone's focus should be on fairness. Management should ensure that employees feel they are fairly treated and they feel that decisions have been made in their interest. Okay? And how employees feel about their level of pay, the benefits that they are getting from the organization, the opportunities for promotion, opportunities for training, right? All of these ensure that feeling of being fairly treated is created on the mind of the employee. Okay, so there should be a focus on fairness. Then it's also important that as management focuses on fairness, it is made clear. So the employees should be given more information about how decisions are made in the organization. All right. If that transparency is there, they have explanations as to how conclusions were made or how decisions were made in the organization, then it helps to demystify all the questions on the minds of uh, the employees. They get to understand why some conditions are the way they are. It also helps the employees to voice out their perspectives or what they think about the decisions which have been made. So when fairness is made clear, it makes employees know how the decisions were made, and then it also helps them to express themselves and say what they think about the decisions that have been made. So you realize that these employees do not harbor any resentment inside, but they are able to express themselves, and as they express themselves, conflicts are resolved in an ethical manner. And then management should also focus on status and not power. It has been found that when people are focused on power, for example, if you have a supervisor who is so power drunk, they tend to treat other employees in an unfair manner. Okay, they tend to mistreat other employees who work under them. On the other hand, if the supervisor is rather focused on status, all right, then what happens is that they have a heart and eyes for other employees, and they tend to treat other employees more fairly than if they are focused on power. Okay, so it is advisable that managers focus more on issues related to their status and tone down the focus on power, right? So there should be more focus on status than on power so that other employees get to be treated fairly. Then we also look at the concept of diversity and respect, right? If we say diversity, diversity is a recognition that people are different in many visible and non-visible ways. And it's important to understand this and value other people. It doesn't matter how different they are from us. At the workplace, you realize that there are different kinds of people and they behave in different ways. The fact that they are different does not mean that they are less of human beings than we are. So it's important that at the workplace you recognize the differences that people have and yet respect them anyway. So diversity is both given and acquired. Sorry. So you can the diversity that we see around us, the differences that we see around us is given. Sometimes people are born the way they are, and sometimes it's acquired. People grow into becoming something that they want to be or they have decided they want to be. All right. And these differences can be differences in age, differences in ethnic origin. You have physical abilities, differences in nationality, differences in sexual orientation, differences in educational background, differences in the marital status, differences in religious beliefs, life and work experience, and a host of other differences. There are some that are not visible to the eye, yet there are differences that exist. Okay, it's therefore important that businesses or organizations realize that employees that work in the organization are different. However, there are some strengths in the differences that they they show or the differences that are exhibited. So it's important that managers or leaders of the various organizations capitalize on and maximize the diversity of their staff. So you'll notice that if you are looking for skills, you have a different skill set in each employee. However, the manager or the supervisor of that particular team needs to know what skill that each individual has and has to be able to capitalize on those skills. All right. And the starting point for organizations is to recognize or to realize the value of these people, right? And actively seek to benefit from them. So if you know the different kinds of people you have in your organization and how they contribute to the success of your organization with um, the the differences that they have, how these differences contribute to the success of your organization. Once the organization or the management knows this about employees, then you realize that you'll be able to benefit from the strengths that employees possess. Okay, so that no matter um how much difference you have within the workforce, it's important that every individual is respected for both their strengths and their weaknesses. And as you are able to manage these differences well, you notice that the strengths of each employee tends to complement um, each other in a way that makes their their weaknesses not so visible. Okay, so it's important that organizations recognize and actively seek to benefit from the diversity of their staff. So there are some times that we ask ourselves, okay, there are times that we have perceptions about people. So you sometimes ask yourself why people behave in a particular way, right? And in some cases, you may not even have met them, yet you have some perceptions about them. Okay. So there's this question: have you ever asked yourself why we as people or human beings or employees, or why we make assessments on people who in reality we have never met? Okay. And sometimes we get to work with people that you have never spoken to, you have never asked a question, yet in your mind, you have some thoughts about them. Okay. So you feel that, okay, because they are looking a particular way that is different from how you look, because they are looking different from how you look, or because they are showing up in a way that is not what you expect them to show up in, then it makes you feel like um they are they are maybe not as good as you are, or they are not at the level you think they should be at. Okay. But it's important that if you are working with diversity, if you are working with different people, then you have to understand stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination. Otherwise, you may not be able to treat other people like they have to be treated in the workplace. So, what are stereotypes? Stereotypes are a set of characteristics which are attributed to members of a social group. And these stereotypes are heavily loaded with emotions attached to them. So if we pick a group of people or members of a social group, for example, if I pick, let's say, a class of people, right? We'll discuss this in details when we meet. But if we pick, let's say, a particular tribe, right? You realize that once I mention the name of the tribe, some characteristics come to your mind. And you'll notice that these characteristics are attributed to members of that particular tribe. And the characteristics that will come to your mind are the stereotypes. And these stereotypes can be positive or negative. There are positive stereotypes when their structure meets positive features. So, if let's say the particular tribe has characteristics that aligns with what society believes, then we will say that they have um, there's a positive stereotype, or the characteristics are positive. But if those characteristics do not meet what the society expects, or if they have the characteristics being negative, then we say that the stereotype will be negative, or there are negative characteristics associated with members of that social group. However, you realize that it's not everyone in that social group that will have that characteristics. But because we have assigned the social group with those characteristics, we believe that everyone or every individual who belong to who belongs to that social group also has that characteristic, which may not be entirely true. Okay. Another thing is that individuals develop strong negative stereotypes of other groups than of those in which it belongs. So, for example, if I find myself belonging to a particular social groups, you will notice that um, I will not see the people who are in my social group with me as having maybe some negative characteristics because I align with them. However, if there's a social group that I don't associate with, what will happen is that it will be easy for me to associate or to develop negative stereotypes for the social group that I am not a part of. Okay. And that's what happens sometimes at the workplace. You notice that you have groups of people, friends, and the friends who have maybe a clique would see another set of people who do not belong to um, their group as not belonging to their class. So they are likely to develop strong negative stereotypes for that social group. Okay. And when this happens, you realize that we go around and we have perceptions about people without necessarily interacting with the people themselves. Okay. And these perceptions are based on the characteristics that we associate with the um, social group that the individuals belong to. Okay. Then you have prejudice. Prejudice refers to an unfair or unreasonable opinion or feeling, and it is formed without enough thought or knowledge. So you would notice here that a prejudice has a foundation in stereotyping, where because of the characteristics that you have associated with a particular social group, you tend to have an opinion about all members of that social group because of the perception you have about them. Okay, so now you tend to have some unreasonable opinion and unreasonable feeling about that social group just because of the stereotype. Okay, so a prejudice has its base as stereotyping. Okay, and it is universal and rigid and may be thought. So a prejudice may be a thought, it may be a belief, or it may be an attitude. And this attitude, most of the time, is manifested through discrimination. So, based on the stereotype you have about a particular group, you tend to have some feeling about them. And then the feeling you have about them, which is the prejudice, make you now treat them in an unfair manner. The treatment in an unfair manner is what we call discrimination. Okay. So a way to defeat prejudice is through a change of perception, right? It's important to know that even though you have groups of people, you as an individual, you have to interact with the people personally to be able to form a correct um, image about them. Okay. Otherwise, we'll go around and be seeing people as bad people, as um we have all sorts of descriptions in our minds about people. Meanwhile, we have not encountered them at all. Okay. So it's important to be open-minded, right? And say the right things about people, because for all you know, some information that you are giving out which is not correct is what another person will take along and will not just associate it with an individual, but that person will associate it with a group of people. And investigations will show that maybe the source of your information is not even right. Okay. So it's important to have a change of perception and be open minded, as well as transmit correct information. Okay. And then instead of the fear of an unknown, or instead of um, being afraid to reach out to people and get to know them for who they are, we rather have to be curious enough, okay, get to know people, get to talk to people, get to interact with them. Then you know who they really are, so that we don't get to treat them unfairly because of the social group that they belong to. Okay. So, like we have said, discrimination is an unfair and unequal treatment of employees. This is workplace discrimination, right? So, workplace discrimination refers to an unfair and unequal treatment of employees or job applicants based on certain protected characteristics. So, based on maybe an individual's age, or based on their race, based on maybe a disability that they have, or their religion, or national origin, or sexual orientation, or maybe gender identity. If that person is treated in an unfair manner, then we call it discrimination at the workplace. And sometimes it happens. You notice that people are due for promotion, people are due for training, yet because of the um prejudice, or because of the stereotypes that maybe a supervisor has about that employee, it is manifested in discrimination, and they don't tend to enjoy all of those benefits that they have to enjoy. So, according to the British Council, discrimination is when a person is treated less favorably because of their race, their marital status, maybe a disability, religion, sexual orientation, their age, ethnic origin, the belief, the gender, okay, a member of a disadvantaged category, illness, or any other criteria which prohibits the human rights and fundamental freedom of the rights recognized by the law in the areas of politics, economics, social, and cultural activities, or any other area of public life. Okay, so it's important that we get to know people for who they are and do not treat them unfairly because of maybe some stereotypes or prejudice that we have about them. Another workplace ethical issue we want to focus on is the conflict of interest. If we say a conflict of interest, it refers to a situation where an individual's interest interferes or reasonably appears to interfere with the interest of the organization as a whole. So sometimes it's straightforward to see that the interest of the individual is interfering with the interest of the organization. At other times, it's not straightforward. It looks like it, or it appears to interfere. So in both cases, there is a conflict of interest, whether it is interfering or it appears to interfere, there is a conflict of interest. And it's important that when there's a conflict of interest, it is addressed immediately. Okay, this is not ethical. So relevant personal interests may be of a financial or non-financial nature, and it may concern a personal or family relationship or professional affiliation. Sometimes the conflict of interest may show up in a financial form, or sometimes it can show up as maybe just a favor. Okay, so someone is due for promotion, and no, your family member is there, so you want that person rather to show up and not the employee who has been working for some time and merits that promotion or that training. Okay, so it may be financial or non-financial. It's important to note that perceived conflicts of interest, as much as possible, should be avoided. So sometimes it's not really a conflict of interest, like I said. It just appears to be a conflict of interest, but it's not really the case. Even in that circumstance, whether the conflict of interest is perceived, it's just a perception, as much as possible, the employee has to avoid it, because the perceptions of people can impact the organization's reputation. And sometimes it can raise doubts about how decisions are made in the organization. So it may not really be the case that there's really a conflict of interest. It's just the perception that people have about the work that you are doing. When that happens, it's important to clear the air and remove all forms of doubt in the minds of the people you are working with. Okay. The reasonable appearance of a conflict of interest can constitute a reputational risk to the organization. And if it turns out to be unsubs even if it turns out that what is being said is not true, or if it turns out to be unsubstantiated, you realize that the organization will still suffer for the um, the effect, okay, on its reputation. And there are several forms of conflicts of interest. A few have been listed here. All right. So an example is when an employee works part-time in the evening for a company that sells a product that competes with the products of their company. All right. Or an employee has a secondary employment position and solicits other employees or customers for the business of the secondary employer. All right. Or an employee has the signing authority on a non-profit organization's business account. So that employee is able to endorse the NGO's business account. And that same employee is the corporate officer of the accounts in a bank. Okay, you notice what can happen. He has control over the account, and he's also managing the account. A lot of things can happen, but you realize that this employee may not even do any such thing, but because it appears to be a conflict of interest, something has to be done about it. He either has to let go of the signing authority he has on the NGO's business account, or designate that account to another person, give it out to another person to manage. Okay. The fourth example is an employee who provides sales referrals exclusively to a relative. Okay. Or a manager dating an employee who reports to him or her. Right? You can also have an employee's daughter who is employed by the organization's auditors and performs audits in that organization. This is the company owner's daughter, okay, and works with an auditing firm. And this auditing firm is the one that is auditing the organization. If the daughter gets to audit her father, will she find anything wrong? No. Okay, so that becomes a conflict of interest. And then the last example we have here, there are several more. A senior officer or procurement employee who has a relative, and this relative works at a critical supplier of the company. So um, you have a senior officer who has a relative that works, they all work in the so you have a procurement officer who buys things from another company, and in the other company the supplier there is um a relative, okay, and both relatives participate in the company's business relationship. So if this procurement guy needs to buy an item, he goes straight to the supplier who happens to be his relative. Okay, you realize that they can connive and um, get involved in some activities which are not right. So all of these are some examples of conflicts of interest. And when they happen, it is important that the employee quickly gets management's attention. So that employee has to inform management about the situation. So if after informing management about the situation, he is given the go ahead to continue the activity, then it means it's no more a conflict of interest. Management has an idea of what is happening. So, for example, an HR manager gets to sit on a panel, and on this panel, you are interviewing people for a particular role. And one of the applicants happen to be your sister or your brother. It's important that you let other panel members know that the next person to come is a relative. If after knowing they still allow you to go ahead and interview them despite knowing that he's a relative, it's no more a conflict of interest because you have made it known and management has given the go ahead, right? But if it is concealed and no, without anyone's knowledge, that relative gets to benefit from your presence as a relative on the panel, then that is a conflict of interest. We also want to look at whistleblowing. Whistleblowing is a practice in which individuals or employees, they can also be former employees of the organization. When these individuals report on ethical, illegal, or wrongful activities within that organization to relevant authorities, either internally within the organization or externally to government agencies, the media, and other third parties, then we say whistleblowing has occurred. All right. So whistleblowing basically involves in exposing the wrongdoing in the organization to authorities. Okay, and it can be done by employees, former employees. Okay, it can also be done by some individuals who have no business relationship with the organization whatsoever. Once the wrongdoing is identified, it can be reported. So the reporting can be made internally to the management, or it can be done externally to government agencies, the media, or other concerned parties. And the main goal of whistleblowing is to expose wrongdoing, to protect the public interest, and then to promote transparency and accountability. So there are times that people blow the whistle because of selfish reasons. Maybe someone is occupying a position that they are interested in, and to get the person out of the place, they would rather expose the wrongdoing that the person is involved in to get them off so that they would be there. But the main goal the main objective of whistleblowing is to expose wrongdoing, not any selfish um, gain, to expose wrongdoing and to protect the entire public. So, for example, if there's a product on the market that can harm the consumer, it's important that if an employee gets to know this, they blow the whistle. Okay. It's also to promote transparency and accountability. All right. So you have in whistleblowing, you have whistleblowing and then corporate whistleblowers. We have seen whistleblowing. All right. Then you have corporate whistleblowers. They focus on organizations. Okay. They focus on organizations, individuals. So they focus on the activities of the organization. And if the activities of the organization is not right and will harm the general public, then they'll go ahead and um, and report it. Okay. So you can blow whistle against individuals in the organization or against the activities of the organization so far as it will cause harm to other people. All right. Then I spoke about fairness earlier. It's important that at the workplace there's fairness. And one of the areas to ensure fairness in is compensation, all right? How people are compensated. It's important that when people put in the work, they get pay that can be equated to the work that has been done. So there should be equal pay for equal work, right? And then there should also be a wage that, or the payment that is giving them should be such that they are able to meet their basic needs. So that you will not have an employee working for you, and then at the end of maybe the week or at the end of the month, you give them money that barely takes them through um, fulfilling their basic needs. So food, shelter, and healthcare should at least be covered by the wages that they get. Then there should be transparency in the communication. There should be some structure, okay, that shows how employees are compensated. So if there's the structure, then you know this is the basic. If you have other allowances or bonuses and benefits, then they are add-ons, but there's a basic structure that every employee knows is at work in the organization. All right. It's also important to pay employees based on what is happening within a particular industry. So, for example, if you have engineers or you have doctors or you have nurses, it's important to know how much nurses are paid in the industry so that you don't get to underpay the nurses who are working in your hospital. When this is done, you are able to retain the talent in your organization, and you also are able to get people who will work in ethical ways. Okay. Then you also have to ensure that you are compensating the employees based on their their performance. So if people are putting in a lot of effort and it's showing in the results they are producing, it's showing in the reports that they are doing well, then you should also ensure that um, they are equally compensated. They are getting promotions, they are getting bonuses as is required. Okay. And this will ensure that high performing employees are rewarded. Okay. Then it's also important that from time to time the organization okay, checks how salaries or how compensation is being made. And then if there are any differences between what the organization is doing and what other organizations in the industry are doing, then you get to rectify those differences. Or if you have differences that are based on gender, on race, or On other characteristics, we just spoke about discrimination. It's important that you ensure pay equity. Okay, so you conduct an analysis, and once you identify any discrepancies, you rectify them. Okay, and then you finally ensure that employees have access to some benefits. So beyond the compensation, it's also important that you take care of their health, right? Their retirement, sometimes leave. If they have to go back to school, you have to consider all of those. Okay, so it's important that if the organization wants employees to work in ethical ways, then they have to consider implementing these fair compensation practices. There are also some labor practices that will ensure that employees work in ethical ways. All right. So there's the non-discrimination and equal opportunity. We have spoken about that. There's the need for a safe workplace, right? Then another one is the anti-harassment and anti-bullying policies in the workplace. So the organization should have policies related to harassment and bullying. Okay. Employees should not be exposed to environments where they'll be sexually harassed or they'll be bullied. And the only way this will happen is when they are protected by policies. Then it's also important to ensure a work-life balance. So it will not be wise to say that if the organization is running 3 shifts, an employee works for the morning shift, works for the afternoon shift, and works for the night shift on a particular day. That is not right. Okay, so there should be a balance between work and other aspects of the employee's life. There's also the freedom of association, where employees should be allowed to form the unions that they want to form, to relate with people they want to relate to, okay, and all of that. So there's the freedom of association, and this should not be hindered by management, okay. And the sixth one is a fair treatment of temporary and contract workers. Contract workers are people who are not permanent employees of an organization. So, for example, they have a fixed term of work. So, it could be a 3 month contract they are on, or a 6 month contract, or a 2 year contract. But you notice that at the end of that period, they will no more be working in the organization. There are also temporary workers, we call them casual workers. And sometimes you notice that these group of workers are not fairly treated. They do not have any protection, okay, because the documents they sign do not contain any form of insurance. Okay, so it's important that the temporary workers and contract workers are also treated fairly. So the attention should not be only on the permanent staff, but also on the contract workers and temporary workers. And then it's important to also look at the practices for termination and layoff. For every organization, there should be set down procedures, okay, for which you terminate an employee's contract, so that it's not like the employee gets to work one day and then their contract is terminated. It's not fair. Okay, so there should be practices for termination and layoff, so that employees are protected. And then we just spoke about whistleblower. So there's the need for whistleblower protection, where if the employee blows the whistle, they should not be exposed to harm. Okay, they should not be exposed to attacks from the party that was exposed, or the party that was reported, or the party that was doing the wrong, um, uh, that was involved in that wrong act. They should not be exposed to harm from such people. And then, as much as possible, employees should be trained regularly. Okay, if employees are trained regularly, they get to know what is right and what is wrong. They get to know what is expected of them and what is not expected of them. And it helps them to behave in ethical ways. Otherwise, their unethical behavior will cost the opportunity, will cost the organization. And then the last one is the sustainability and social responsibility. We have discussed CSR in other classes, right? So it's important that organizations focus on sustainability in such a way that we are not only focused on profit, making the profit, and that is all, but we also focus on the fact that future generations will be able to enjoy the same resources that are available to us. So based on this, our operations, uh, uh, how the organization uh, conducts itself, how employees conduct themselves will be such that they will all be geared towards sustainability as well as um, social responsibility. Right. So I believe this has been a marathon, but we really needed to get this done. So we will discuss this in detail in class. Ensure that as you go through, if there are any questions, jot them down, and that will be the basis. Your questions will be the basis of our discussion. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your submissions.